really appreciate those people that have been able to give some time to us this Monday evening to join us for our How to Engage Over the Winter webinar, with a particular focus on social media interaction for clubs. We're really pleased tonight that we're joined by Tom Holcroft and his marketing and communications team from Trent Bridge. So they are going to deliver the main part of the presentation on social media. Just before that, though, we are going to look at a couple of other things that we think will really benefit clubs in terms of like their winter administration and how they're operating over the winter. You know, we're obviously really conscious that every summer is really busy for our network of volunteers, none more so than the last couple of summers with all the extra complications that clubs have had to face. So we're not deliberately trying to task you with another 10, 15 things to do, honestly. We do appreciate that, you know, this is kind of a bit of downtime for some of you, but hopefully you'll pick up some tips over the course of this webinar on stuff you can do around club development, around community engagement, and around social media without, you know, making it as a second summer for you in terms of how busy you are. So on the screen there, you'll see kind of what the agenda is for the evening. I'm going to start us off with a bit of stuff on club development. I'm going to pass over to Ian DePaolo, who's our Cricket Development Officer for Participation and Growth. And he's going to talk you through a little bit about community engagement, who you can promote your club to, and what you can offer to them. And then we're going to pass over to Tom and his team to talk about social media. If you do have any questions during the webinar, if you don't mind putting them in the chat, we'll come to all of those at the end. If that's okay. Thank you. So club development, obviously I am a club development officer within the community and development team. So I should know what club development is. I think I do. And, you know, I think when we talk about that with our local clubs, you know, they can be a massive range of topics and problems and issues and things that clubs are looking to work on. But generally speaking, club development is how your club can improve its offer for its existing members and how it can make itself more attractive to new members. And that generally sparks conversations along 5 topics. So that's players, volunteers, finances, facilities, and governance. Obviously, these are, for the most part, you know, stuff that is really important to clubs in the summer as well. But we're going to touch mostly, you know, under each of these brackets and what you can really focus on during the winter months. So I'm just going to kind of run through each of those areas and where clubs could be looking to, you know, pick up some ground in the off season to make their summers slightly less busy. And players, you know, I think are, you know, they're our main stakeholders in the game. Without them, clearly there wouldn't be any cricket on a Saturday or a Tuesday night down at your club. And I think sometimes, especially when club committees are often made up of people who, or not too many active players, I think club committees can sometimes be a little bit, I wouldn't say, perhaps guilty is too strong a word, but of not necessarily talking to their players on a regular basis or not getting an input from their players. Of course, that's a two-way thing. Players should be inputting to the committee and making themselves volunteers in the first place. But I think one thing that's really important is that your committee and your club is understanding your players and understanding your membership, and a really good way to learn more about that over the winter is a player survey. So from that you can learn about, you know, how you can maximize their participation in the club and maximize their enjoyment. So asking stuff about, you know, playing formats, training days, what might make those players buy into the club a bit more, what might make them available a bit more. So if you've got, you know, 40 members and you've got 2 teams and you're often struggling to get that second team out, you could be asking questions which will help you learn why those 40 players aren't making themselves available often enough for you to get out 2 teams, you know, more frequently or more easily. And also, you know, the player feedback is really important in terms of helping a club decide its direction of travel for the future. So if your committee is thinking that you know, the next most important investment for your club is new covers, but you haven't asked the players about that, and actually 80% of the players would rather have improved changing room facilities. That's an investment that's not necessarily what your members want. So that survey can be really important in helping you shape your direction of travel. Of course, cricket, more so than kind of ever before, well, certainly pre-COVID, was turning into a 12-month sport. So look to explore opportunities to play matches and train in the winter. There are a number of indoor facilities that we understand to be back up and running, offering winter programs for open age cricket, for women's cricket, and for junior cricket. So if you have any questions about that, please contact your club development officer, and we can point you in the right direction. And then, of course, while that playing activity will keep your members engaged, there's also the opportunity to keep them engaged through social events and build that camaraderie around your club. So if you don't have somebody who's in charge of kind of a social secretary position, that might be something that you look to recruit this winter. If you can plan 2 or 3 events to bring your players together on a regular basis through the winter, that's going to improve the chances that they all come back for that first net session in April when you return outside. And then of course the big one is player recruitment, for which there is kind of no magic wand, unfortunately. Whenever we go down to a club for a club development meeting, it's always about can you get us more players, can you get us more volunteers? There's no magic wand to recruiting players, but you want to consider stuff like leaflet drops, obviously your social media engagement, which Tom and his team will come on to later, potentially social media advertising, membership incentives. If a current member can bring in a new member or two, how could they be rewarded for that? And then certainly at a junior level, using the national programs model or working with your local schools, they are the best ways to try and attract numbers at that junior level. Similarly with volunteers, you can run a survey which will help you understand what they're looking to gain from the club, but it can also be a really good way of increasing your reach to potential new volunteers. It's impossible for people to have a 20-minute conversation round the boundary on a Saturday afternoon with every single parent or every single family member that might be attached to a club. So giving them the opportunity to fill in a survey that might take 5 minutes, which says kind of what their background is, how much time they might be able to give, certainly gives you a head start when you look to do that face-to-face recruiting. You might find through a volunteer survey that you've got an accountant you didn't know of, or a tradesman, or somebody who works in marketing, and they can be your new treasurer, your new social media or website manager, or somebody who can be able to really offer you a good service for some pavilion renovations, potentially at a discount. So really understanding the background of your membership is important, and that survey can help reach more people than you might be able to reach normally. Development opportunities. So we think we're back up and running at full capacity in terms of our core courses for coaching and umpires and scorers this winter. So if you've got a young coach or a scorer or umpire looking to develop themselves and take it to the next level, then potentially subsidizing or paying for those opportunities for those volunteers. And that comes on slightly to the next category, so reward and recognition, which is something we've focused on a little bit more centrally at Trentbridge this year. You don't want to have to recruit a new set of volunteers every summer. Clubs know how difficult that is. So keeping the ones that you do manage to recruit, through reward and recognition, whether that could be anything from vouchers or trophies or flowers or whatever it is, but just a nice thank you to say thanks for all the hard work you've done. Qualification audit. What I mean by that is making sure you can get to the new season with everybody's qualifications in date, your first aid courses, your safeguarding courses, DBSs. You don't want to be panicking again when it comes to the first week of the season and your coaches have got lapsed qualifications and stuff like that. And then around volunteer recruitment, same sort of thing as with players. Local advertising in social media or newsletters, leaflet drops, going out to the community and seeing if there's anybody out there that is retired or has some spare time or owns a business and might be able to contribute in any sort of way. getting out and reaching your community, which is something that Ian's going to pick up on in a few minutes. Finances, actually, I stand corrected. The biggest question isn't about can you get any new players. It's usually can you help us with any cash, which unfortunately we're not the FA. We don't have endless amounts of cash we can pour into our clubs, but we try when we can. So clubs have to rely on their own financial models to create room for investment. So when we talk about finances in the winter, I think we're looking at two main bands of that. One of which is sponsorship, and the other is fundraising. So when it comes to sponsorship, first and foremost, again, when you've run that survey and you know a little bit more about your members, you might be able to explore sponsorship opportunities through them. So is there any of your members that own a local business that they might want to push, or know of somebody that does, that they might want to push their local business at your ground or on your kit or anything like that? And a piece of advice I always offer to clubs is, when they don't know where to start in terms of approaching businesses for sponsorship, who is already advertising in your area? That tells you who is looking to attract business in your area. So if you get, you might get those free magazines through the post. I certainly get one. It's called something like NG8, I think, or you might get a local news through your post. There's hundreds of adverts in there, and they're all looking to advertise in the area where you're living, which could be the area where your cricket club is. So that's a really good place to start if you're kind of starting from scratch. And twinned with that, it's about knowing your club. So when you do approach those local businesses for sponsorship, you can tell them how many members you've got, of what age demographic and stuff your members are, what social economic demographic perhaps your members are, how many visitors you get to the ground every week also. So stuff like that, really important. Businesses, if you come across as knowing your stuff and knowing your information, businesses will pick up on that. And then, the second brand, so fundraising. I think a key place to start is having something that you're raising funds towards. Without that, it's really difficult to get a buy-in from members that, they might be chucking 20 quid in here and there, and it kind of disappears, and they're not sure what they're contributing their money to. Or if you're trying to get people involved in, sponsored walks or cycles, again, it gives them a purpose, and it makes their hard work a lot more worthwhile if you're setting a target of £2,000 towards a new cyc screen or something like that, as opposed to, kind of a very generic approach to it. So I'd always recommend setting a target, setting a goal, and publicizing that to everybody, so everybody knows all about what you're trying to achieve. And then when you're looking, potentially fundraising events, it's what are your members interested in? How are you going to get them involved in your fundraising efforts? So that's where, again, that survey is really helpful. If you find out your members are really interested in, let's say, football or fitness, or if you have a huge junior membership and they're all into gaming, that's the type of information you can use to shape your fundraisers over the winter. And that's where the bottom one comes in. Fundraising over the winter, you're probably not going to get everybody down to the ground at the same time for a nice event in a warm clubhouse or in the sun, and it's going to be difficult to get people together. So anything regarding remote fundraising, people can kind of do it on their own and contribute to a bigger cause, or can do it from their bedroom if you're talking about a fantasy football league or a gaming competition or something like that. Or if you want to do like a collective sponsored walk or sponsored cycle, people can do that within their own time, on their own, and then contribute to a larger cause. So think about stuff you can do that doesn't necessarily mean you've got to get 20 or 30 people together in one place in one time over the winter, because that can be difficult. I promise it will be somebody else talking in a minute and not me. So I'm just moving on to the last couple of slides in terms of the development stuff. Facilities. So I think like the top three things here really are all intertwined. How can we make more use of our facility over the winter? How can we try to make our facility a 12-month facility and not a 4 or 5 month facility? How can we get more people through the door? So that goes back to player and volunteer recruitment as well. People are often saying, oh, we need new players at this age, or who can play for the first team, or we need a new volunteer who's a trained umpire. If you can get 50 to 100 more people through your door every winter, that just increases the scope for those new players or new volunteers, whether it's them directly or whether it's their families. So I always try to encourage clubs to think about how they can get more people through the door, and that will have like a natural impact on their volunteer and playing membership. And also, this will be something Ian touches on, so I won't go too much into this, but how can we be an asset to our community? I think clubs can sometimes think, especially in terms of sponsorship and membership, how can we get something out of our community? But again, for that kind of, speculate to accumulate thing, how can you be an asset to your community, which will bring people in the first instance, and that will pay back over the over the coming months and years. And then finally, if anyone was on our county grants webinar last month, there's a big push around creating welcome environments in terms of pavilion and outdoor spaces. So this, perhaps not on a cold day in December, but before the start of the season, if you get the opportunity to go down to the ground, have a little bit of an audit of your facilities to see where you might be able to improve it. We can provide a checklist for this that the ECB have given us. So if you're interested in doing that, just drop your club development officer a message and we can provide that. And then finally, the governance stuff. So kind of, what is the club trying to achieve over the next few years in terms of an action plan that can really give the club some direction of travel. And you'll notice all of these things can be kind of intertwined. So once you've got that feedback from your players and volunteers, that can really give you a good idea of where you need to be going in terms of your facilities, your fundraising, and your recruitment. We've talked about kind of a qualifications audit, making sure everybody's got their DBSs. That includes captains as well as coaches and umpires and scorers. If you have a club safeguarding officer who's fully qualified, they can become a DBS verifier. So if you don't have a DBS verifier at your club, let us know, and we can make sure that your CSO gets the permissions to be able to do that. The ECB County Grant Scheme. So that's this winter around that creating welcome environment I just spoke of. All clubs should have the guidance notes for that. So if you want to progress with an application, again, contact your club development officer and we can talk to you about that. Keeping your website updated and your social media, again, that's what Tom and his team are going to talk about in more detail. But when we talk about that creating welcome environments, that it's actually not your ground necessarily that is that first impression. It's your website. If people want to find out about a club, they'll Google it now. So if that's had kind of 4 months of dead time over the winter, that's not a fantastic first impression to be giving people who might be looking to join the club. So trying to keep that active if you can. Policies and procedures. So any updates from the ECB in terms of code of conduct, safeguarding, anti-discrimination. We'll always inform our clubs of that, but just making sure you pick that up. And then, just as an overall theme for all of this stuff, engaging with your club development officer. So, whether it's myself or Andrew or Josh, we're happy to come down to your club or meet for a coffee or anything like that to discuss basically everything we've just been through. So I appreciate, there's quite a lot to that. And we'd be happy to come along and discuss it all with you and pick up the bits which you think are relevant and pick up the bits which you think you can pick up this winter. Because of course, we won't be expecting a club to do all of that, but that's just giving you a flavour of the type of stuff you could do over those kind of key development strands. So yeah, always don't be afraid to engage your club development officer. We'll be happy to come to a meeting anytime. Thankfully, that's enough from me. So I'm going to pass over to Ian DePaolo for the second part of this webinar around community engagement. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, as Joe says, obviously I'm going to talk to you a little bit about community engagement. For those of you that don't know me, my role within the community development team is around engaging communities. It's a lot focused on the city, but what that involves a lot of is working in communities, finding out what the people in those communities would like to do. Obviously, we're trying to get people into cricket, and then connecting them with the relevant office. What we're trying to do now, in my work with Joe and Josh and Andrew, is bring elements of that works well in the community, particularly in the city, and use it to bring clubs closer to their communities. We know a lot of clubs out there will already have really close relationships with their local communities, but some might want a little bit of advice on how they can reach out a little bit more. So we started with, what is community engagement and understanding it. And as you can see there, it's really about understanding that local community so you can engage them. And it's about achieving sort of long-term relationships. So creating partnerships and relationships with your local businesses or sport clubs or other people that might engage with the club is a really good starting point, and that's really what we're trying to get to the root of. Thank you, Joe. I can do a witty here and give it the next slide, please. So what does that mean for us? It's really about knowing within your local community, and obviously within your communities at your clubs, you're going to know better than I am or Joe is about what are the key areas and the key people you can speak to there. But we would try to help you to look at the kind of people or the kind of groups that you can engage with. So the kind of things that we would look at, and focusing on two main areas, would be who can we promote our offers and programs to? Who are our audience? If we're running All Stars or Dynamos, we want to be obviously engaging those young people, the families with children of those age groups. And also, as Joe mentioned earlier about being an asset to the community, is what can we offer to those community groups? And they're the two main areas that we would focus on. Next slide, please, Joe. Thank you. So obviously, when we're talking about what we can offer, as mentioned, we've got all of our playing opportunities. So from All Stars cricket, if you're running that, all the way through to your first 11, there's an opportunity there for you to recruit new players all the way through that pathway within your club, and it's how you go about it. Your volunteering opportunities, like Joe's talked about, and the recruitment that he talked about as well. There's people potentially in your local community on your doorstep that might have an interest in cricket but don't play anymore. We've found that with our walking cricket offer that we have around the county, we've got a lot of people that have come back to playing cricket. But we do have people that turn up to those sessions just to score. Now, they could be a scorer for a local club, and it's about just engaging with those people and trying to find them within your community. And I'll touch on later about the tools that we're working on to try and help you do this, because obviously, as Joe's mentioned, all of you people out there in Clubland are volunteers, and it's about having the time. And our job is to try and support you to be able to do all of these things that we're suggesting. The other thing was obviously about facility use. So have you got, if you've got the space within your pavilion or the bar, you can hire it out for functions, things like that. Have you thought about hiring out the outfield to things like fitness classes, things like that? And obviously the car park, which again in winter is sitting empty. So could you hire out the car park space to some local community groups? And we'll touch a little bit about on that in the next slides. So this is the bit where we're looking at who, really. And what we've done here is I've gone through almost a bit of a step-by-step process of how you might do it. Now, your top level would be to speak to your local authority. Sports development teams that they have in some local authorities. A lot of local authorities are now leading towards health and well-being over sports development. But that team or that officer should be across all the different kind of groups that are happening within your local area, from health and fitness groups to slimming world groups to any other kind of sporting or activity group that you might then be able to engage with. So having a conversation with them puts you in a position to say, we are X cricket club and we have these facilities. Do you know of anybody that we could potentially link with? And their job is to link you with them and create those relationships. You've got your local grant leads, which in the city, you've got different areas of the city of Nottingham, and they have their own charitable organisations that get given money and can then give that out to other local partners. Now, there's two things there. They might be able to support you with funding to run some projects or whatever it might be that you're looking for funding for. They also have lots of contacts with community groups, and sometimes community groups that you just wouldn't know about without speaking to these people. So through that local authority contact, you would like to think that they will be able to put you in touch with your local grant leads. Moving then, you've got your youth provision services. So each within the local authorities there should be youth services in there. Who are those people? What are they doing? Have you got a local youth provider that is delivering and engaging a good amount of young people that then in turn you can engage with some cricket taster sessions that then might turn into all stars or dynamos or juniors. So it's just about thinking about how you can get out there and link with different groups. And then Facebook community groups. So obviously linking this back to the social media stuff that we're talking about. So there are community groups out there based on areas that have, plenty of people in there that you can get a message out there. So it's about joining as a representative of your club and being able to post into that group to let people know what is happening at your club. So it's another way of promotion and engagement. So for example, I'm in a group for the Sherwood in Nottingham community group because it's close to one of the projects that I run. There are over 11,500 people in that group. So if I post something in there, that's got quite good reach just by posting into that group. So as well as posting on your social media, which Tom and the team will obviously come on to, it's things like these sort of community groups that you can get into, post into, and you're into a whole another audience. Thanks, Joe. So drilling down from those areas, we're looking at now the kind of smaller groups that you can engage with. So Slimming World or Weight Watchers groups that might be looking for a venue. So the Pavilion could be a great spot for them to host their weekly meetings. Running clubs, cycling clubs, these are things that might have, you could potentially hire out things like the car park here. So a running club or a cycling club might meet up in the car park, go off for their cycle or their run, and then come back to that car park, and you could then open up the bar and the changing facilities. You could charge them to use the car park, or you could just say use the car park for free, but they could have a drink after. So it's, again, this is something that through the winter maybe gives you an opportunity where rather than the club sitting dormant, can engage people in another way. And obviously when you've got people there engaging with the club, you might pick up new volunteers, you might pick up new players through those conversations that you're able to have with people that ordinarily might not come anywhere near the ground or through the doors. Fitness instructors, again, fitness instructors and personal training, a lot of people, particularly obviously with the pandemic, have been doing outside classes, outdoors, things like boot camp classes, and they're always looking for facilities to use. So again, using a part of the outfield for somebody to be able to hire it on a Saturday morning through the winter to come and deliver an exercise class for that local community is a way of generating some income that you can hire out the ground. Also, those people that turn up and take part in that class are potential recruits for the club as well. So you could tie into that. One week you could do a little cricket taster session, and you might pick up a group of women for your women's softball, or you might find some men that want to come and play in your sort of men's first 11 or second or third. So again, it's just opening up other avenues to engage people that you might not normally engage. Wedding planners, again, is just something that we look at in terms of promoting the venue as a potential venue for people to use. Dance instructors and groups, so facility depending. If you have if you're blessed with a larger space inside the pavilion, then that's another opportunity. And Scouts or Brownies, again, something that they may already have venues, but they might be looking for alternative venues. So it's just a few examples of the kind of people and the kind of ways you could think a little bit differently about how you could potentially open up your club to other groups to engage the wider community. Thank you, Joe. So here what I've done is a little bit of a working example based on my local area. So I'm in Newark, so I just picked Newark and R&M as an example. So if I was Newark R&M, what I might think about doing is speaking to Newark and Sherwood District Council. I know that they have health improvement officers, and their links with their local community and community champions are really, really strong. So they would be able to put me in touch with the kind of community groups that you probably wouldn't even know about. So that would be one starting point. I looked at a couple of examples of running clubs. So you've got the Not Fast Running Club and Newark Striders. Again, where do they meet? Are they looking for other facilities? How does that look? The same with Newark Cycling Club. In terms of youth provision, One of the main providers in this area is the YMCA. Obviously, they've got a massive site in Newark, and the amount of engagement that they have with young people and the wider community, again, is an opportunity to develop a relationship with somebody who is already engaging a lot of people, and as part of that relationship, you then get access to promote your club to those people. And then there's also an example here of a couple of fitness instructors that might be looking to use a space. So these are the kind of people you could approach, say, hey, we've got this facility, would you be interested in doing anything? And if they're looking to do an outdoor session on a Saturday morning, there's an opportunity there to open up the ground and bring some new people in. So they're just a few examples. And I think the other key thing there is, as I mentioned, myself and Joe and the team we're looking at and working on a community engagement pack. So we are putting this together, and this is a work in progress, but the idea behind it will be that through each local authority, I, and with Joe's help and Josh and Andrew, will be putting a pack together where all the contacts for your local authority, for things like your running clubs, for the YMCA, or the fitness in this example here, we're going to dig all those out and put them into a list and share that with the clubs, because we appreciate that as volunteers, obviously time is precious. So it's all well and good as saying, here's some examples of the things you could do and the people you could speak to, but actually going out and finding the contacts for those requires a little bit of work. So what we want to do is try and do some of that work for you. So should you want to reach out to Not Fast Running Club, then the number or the email and the name of the person to contact is right there for you. And that is something that we are working on putting together for you. That's pretty much it from me, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, Ian. Thank you. I hope everybody found that useful. And yeah, we're working on that resources pack by district to hopefully make that available to clubs as soon as possible. In the meantime, if you want to crack on and get a head start, hopefully what Ian's kind of gone through there has given you an example of the types of avenues you could explore to try and reach out to your community. Right, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a minute and prepare to pass you over to Tom Holcroft and his team to go through the social media part of the webinar. So Tom is the head of marketing and communications for Notts County Cricket Club. I don't know, Tom, if you want to introduce the rest of your team when I pass this over to you, but thankfully they've all found the time to join us on a Monday evening, to a real group effort to try and take us through this and some expertise. So we're very lucky to have them. So you should, Tom, now be allowed to share your screen. So I shall pass over to you.
Evening, everybody. I'm just getting the technology side of things ready. Can everybody now see my screen? Or can someone? Yeah, I've got a thumbs up, so that's all good. Yeah, so as Joe said, I'm the head of marcoms at Trent Bridge, and I've got 3 members of my team here joining me this evening. We'll give you just a few sort of top-level tips on how we think social media is done well, what the keys to success are, and then hopefully there'll be a few questions at the end as well. And all of the guys that are here with me today and myself, we've all been involved to some degree in recreational cricket clubs ourselves as well. So we understand that the landscape is very different doing it as a volunteer at a recreational club as it is with the resources that you have as a paid team at professional level. Just to put into context, first of all, where sort of social media sits in the bigger picture. I think anything you do in relation to comms, as far as we're concerned, has to fit into one of the 4 categories on screen: brand, content, data, experience. Your brand is just basically it's the perception of your club. It's the way that your club looks to the outside world, and that could be your website, it could be your social media, it could be the signage outside your ground. It's just the way that you are seen and observed by people in your community. Content is what you push out there for people to engage with, be that written stuff, be that videos, be that pictures for them to look at. Data is crucial because it's the quality of your data that allows you to communicate with people on a one-to-one basis, be that via email or be it via direct mail or SMS message, whatever it may be. So having that quality and quantity of data for people in your community is important. And then finally, experience. And it doesn't matter what you do in the comms world, if the experience lets you down, once you actually sort of get a person into your club, then all of your comms work goes to waste. So you're always championing the experience as a comms team. The two that social media plays a massive part in out of these are brand and content. Because obviously the whole purpose of social media is sharing content with people, but also doing that in a way that presents your brand in a positive way is something that we'll and the team will touch upon quite a lot as we move through, because that's really important. So just to talk a little bit about the array of platforms that are available and what might be the most accessible ones for you guys, I'll hand you over to Dan, who'll introduce himself as well.
Good evening all. I'm Dan Robbins, Media and Comms Officer at Trent Bridge, Norwich County Cricket Club, and that encompasses quite a few things. A lot of my expertise was in creating videos for the club, and that can be long format and short format, and that changes depending on the three platforms we've got on screen there, along with the likes of YouTube and TikTok. Obviously, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram are our main three. We wouldn't be able to say we've smashed all three of those yet, hence why we've not gone on to something else. We do use YouTube quite a bit, but we've not gone on to TikTok or Snapchat or something like that. I think that's quite a key message, just to try and, especially that's with 4 of us in our team and a few others throughout the summer as well. And it might only be 1 or 2 of you at your local clubs. Just try not to spread yourself too thin if you're going to, because then that'll mean that you're maybe not giving them the right amount of attention to each, and doing them all at 30% rather than one of them at 100, and then kind of adding the other 2 when you can come and go. I think for the passing fan, Twitter is kind of like the one they'll engage with you on the most. So it's quite easy to follow quite a few people on Twitter, and that's where a lot of viral videos come from, because there's a lot of there's a bit more increased sharing capability on there, of the main 3 in my mind. Facebook for me is a bit more of your own community, so the people that are more involved with your club are more likely to find you on Facebook and follow you on Facebook, and that doesn't have to be a closed group effort effectively, but it can be more updates that are more central to your club rather than just overarching updates. And then Instagram's got the younger audience of the lots, with 55% of under 25s and a further 26 between 25 and 34. So that's quite good for obviously bringing more youth into your club, and maybe a bit more of a different content on there. But as I say, if you're without knowing what goes on each club, I don't think I'd recommend one over the other. I think they've all got their own individual benefits, but what I would say is don't spread yourself too thin too early on with those 3, and then not be able to do one to the best of your capability. If you start with one that you think is best for you, whatever your goals and aspirations are as a club at that point, whether it's to give more exposure to the first team, that might be through Twitter and regular updates that I'm sure some of my other members of the team will come on to later, whether you want to create more of a close-knit group and go with the Facebook option, or whether you want to do a little bit more maybe on the day content for Instagram that might entice some younger players to your club. But yeah, the main thing there is to probably don't spread yourself too thin and focus on mastering one before you kind of move on to the others.
Okay, so if
over to Matt, apologies.
I'll pick up off the back of that one. That's quite all right. So I'm Matt. I'm digital marketing manager at Trent Bridge. So just start by running through, I suppose, a few of the kind of basics of certainly what our social media does, and what I'm sure might be able to help you as well. House style is something that we're quite sort of hot on, really, in terms of making sure that everything we do kind of forms part of our general style, whatever that is. So that, there's a hope that without people seeing that it's something that's been shared by Trent Bridge. There are things about it that still say that it is a Trent Bridge post or a Nottinghamshire County Cricket Club post. For us, that can be colour a little bit. That can be, if we do graphics, there's a lot of green and gold on there to keep the kind of brand and shirt colours pretty prominent. It can be a tone of voice thing. We probably, on our tone of voice, take our lead from the sort of history of Trent Bridge, the historic nature of it, and try and play with that a little bit, because it's something we've got that maybe other venues and other competitors don't have. So that's maybe playing a little bit on the fact that we've been here for 150 years and that it's regarded as quite a traditional club, but having a little bit of fun with that as well, being a bit playful, a little bit Henry Blofeld here and there if we can be with how we do it. Things, obviously, different clubs, different organisations have a different tone that'll work for them. That's what we've decided sort of sets us apart a little bit and means that people know when it's us and not somebody else who's talking to them. Then something different will probably work for yours, depending on exactly what you think for your club at the same time. Alongside all of that, of course, there are the basics, things like punctuation, spelling, grammar. It sounds pretty dull to sort of harp on about that very early. It doesn't sound like it's worth coming on a webinar to be told try and spell properly, but it does. It kind of gives an impression, I suppose, as to how much care you're putting in and how seriously what you're putting out there might be taken. If things look a little bit slapdashed, then you know that impression can probably seep in a little bit under the radar without people maybe even knowing that they're thinking it. So it's always worth having a bit of a proof of what you've done. It's easy to miss things. God knows we've all missed things and deleted things a minute after we've posted, or even if you've looked at them 1,000 times before you've clicked send. So it's always worth looking at that and being as accurate as you can. We all make mistakes, obviously. It's not really perfect, but as good as you can be with that. Fill the frame is kind of a thing to do with the imagery, really. I mean, all social media these days, you're very rarely going to post anything without an image on there at all. The days when you might have tweeted by sending a text message from your phone that cost 10p have long gone, and now everything has an image on it, doesn't it? It's pretty much across the board, that kind of thing. And yeah, we might use a sort of SLR camera at times for what we do. We might even get a photographer in for what we do, but we'll also find that a lot of the time the best stuff we'll take is on someone's iPhone, because that's how things are now. So you'll get perfectly good imagery from whatever's in your pocket, but it is that kind of making the most of what you've got. So cropping tightly around what you're doing, whether that is a video, a post-match reaction piece, whether that is a ground shot of something of your ground, whether it's a celebratory shot of someone coming off having scored a ton, whatever it is, you'll get good enough photos with the equipment you've got. That's where we are now in the world, isn't it? But you'll be able to make those sorts of things travel better and look better on your socials if you're quite diligent with how you crop in and make sure that what you're trying to sort of foreground is really big in the frame and does what you want it to do. So that's those kinds of things. These are all the kind of things that I suppose speak to the high standards point there. Whatever you're doing, just do it to the best of your ability. It doesn't have to be the most flashy equipment. It doesn't have to be the most kind of fancy graphic in the world, but as long as you're committing to getting everything you're doing right, nailing the photo and the cropping and thinking about how you're going to word something and maybe do it in a slightly creative way. If you find yourself doing the same kind of tweets over and over again, how can you say the same thing in a slightly different way to try and engage people so that they're not thinking that it's getting repetitive? All those kinds of things sort of speak to high standards. And if in doubt, say no is always a good tip to have as well. Things can sometimes get a bit contentious. Sometimes there can be topics that seem a little bit controversial. You might be tempted to wade in on certain things, but in some ways, going too early on those things doesn't necessarily help you if you're sort of wading in on sort of slightly controversial topics, or if you're struggling to try to work out what your stance on something might be. Then once you've tweeted something, you've kind of committed. So it's well worth giving yourself that little bit of time to make sure that you're aligned as a club before you kind of go public with things, because tweeting is kind of effectively broadcasting these days, isn't it? 10 years ago, so we probably tweeted our mates and tweeted in a very different way, but now it's clear that it's quite a public thing. So it's well worth thinking about that before you go on and tweet. So some of that probably leads into this, really. Spelling and punctuation, as I mentioned before, are pretty crucial. So things like 6 exclamation marks at the end of something might not sort of lead the kind of most professional impression about what sorts of things you kind of do. Missing full stops comes into that as well. It's just those little basics that might seem really minor, but do build up over time. If you're doing a dozen posts a day, it's that overall impression of what you're doing, isn't it? So it kind of builds up an impression of you taking it seriously, and you know what you're doing, or maybe, you know, too many slightly less consistent posts might not give that same impression. And in terms of consistency as well, it's kind of sticking with what you've decided to do. If you're tweeting updates from a game on a Saturday, it's not sort of going every over in the first half hour and then stopping in the afternoon. It's consistency. So whatever works best for you, whatever you can manage in that kind of regard. If you think you're better off tweeting every half hour through a match day or whatever it might be, because you can commit to that, go for that. You don't have to go ball by ball for a bit and then it sort of drops completely by the wayside later in the day. And I suppose equally with that, we've all been tempted. You know, we've been tempted on our socials. Sometimes you feel like you're just tweeting opposition wickets all the time, or it's not a fun time to be on your social media. But the consistency is part of it. If you've decided to make your social media a resource for following a game or whatever it might be, then that is what it is. And if things have gone the other way for an afternoon and the results aren't going your way or whatever it might be, then still do try and keep up that consistency. And even if you might be sort of quite brief in exactly how you describe what's going on, you're better off kind of set a level that you stick with, so that everyone knows what to expect from your social media. Really, it's all about the brand a little bit as well. So that consistency is something that's quite important. You'll see the picture on the left hand side there. We all see enough of these kind of memes floating about that you might share and see on various people's social media. But in the long run, if that's the kind of thing that you're putting out there, it can kind of breed that inconsistency a little bit as well. Obviously, it's, you know, these things look very different to each other. It could get a little bit all over the place. So overall, no matter if the message that you might see that you want to share on one of these things is the kind of thing you want to say, then maybe there's another way of doing it that fits a little bit more in with your branding, with your style. It's always worth trying to work out if you can then reshape that and do it in a way that suits everything else you've put out, and that suits what you want to say and how you want to say it as well. And when it comes to posts as well, it's certainly something to bear in mind on Facebook in particular is the way in which these things are displayed, the way in which people will see it. I think Ollie will come on to this a little bit later as well, but obviously, whereas Twitter can be largely chronological and Instagram has its ways of working as well, Facebook in particular is a non-chronological newsfeed now, isn't it? It pushes things at you in an order that it seems to decide. Really, it's all based on their own algorithm. So you've sort of got to consider that a little bit in terms of what you might post on Facebook, maybe, and how often you might. There are things we won't put on Facebook that we put on other channels because they're trying to work out what might work. It's not the same one size fits all thing across 3-4 social networks. Things will work differently on different ones. So when it comes to Facebook, as you'll know just from browsing your own home screen, the things you'll see are things that lots of your mates have commented on, that have attracted lots of comments, that have got interaction, and that maybe are a bit different to each other as well. So that kind of thing is what's going to hopefully help your sort of Facebook bump up a little bit. So things that your community want to get involved with, things that are different to each other as well. If you're sharing the same photo on a lot of posts, even if it seems relevant, it's a photo of your ground or whatever it might be, if you're repeating things too often, Facebook can be sort of a bit penal on those sorts of things. So it might start to penalize how many people see it, because it thinks people have seen it before, even if the topic of the actual post is different. So mixing things up is pretty useful. Having sort of good quality multimedia on their photos that you've taken, videos, those kind of things will keep pushing things up in a way that doesn't match quite the same on Twitter. So it's worth bearing those things in mind, particularly with Facebook, to make sure that people will engage with it. That'll sort of snowball a bit in terms of the interactions and the following you should get on there. So that's a quick run through of bits to avoid. Ollie is on now, I think, to talk about content.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. I'm hello, first and foremost. I'm Ollie. I'm the club journalist at Trent Bridge. So my primary role is to create content, I suppose. And just like at any amateur club, it becomes a little bit harder to do in the winter than it does in the summer when there's a lot more cricket going on. So I can sympathise with you if that's what's sort of going through your head. And this content slide, you know, predominantly talks about what we can post in the winter, and it talks a little bit as well, and we'll talk a little bit as well about sort of what Joe and Ian said, because it all matches together. The first thing I think about when I'm considering what we can post in the winter and the summer as well is that first bullet point really is who cares. And I suppose the two answers to that can be your key stakeholders. That can be those who are already engaged. It can be your players, your members, your parents, but it can also be those external stakeholders as well, and those people that you're trying to engage. So if you think about fundraising, and then maybe it's local businesses who don't yet know that you're going to try and communicate with them. So when you're thinking about what you want to post, think about, well, who do I want to try and engage in the first instance, because that can help you decide what you do want to go with. If you're, for example, talking or you haven't posted in a while, as happens in the winter, and you're wanting to maybe post a picture of the club just to keep your players engaged, then it can be slightly more informal in tone. If you are trying to, as I say, engage sponsors in a club or trying to raise funds, and what you post is probably going to be more formal in nature. So that's sort of why we touch on who we're thinking about before we post. That second point, multimedia. Yeah, Matt talked about sort of very few posts now, just going out with just prose, and we can all relate to maybe even slideshows or social media posts where it's just reams and reams of writing, and it's probably not the best way to go now in terms of engaging your audience. A lot of media is driven by the imagery, the videos, and I'll come on to this in hints and tips as well. But if you can, throughout the winter and when the season comes around, start building a bank of photos at the club and different kind of ideas, so that your content in the winter isn't just purely focused on writing itself. And that's going to be really helpful. So you can see that picture of Trent Bridge on the right there. I think if you go to Trent Bridge at a given time on a quiet day, it's a fairly good bet that one of the Marcoms members will be sort of on the floor taking a picture from the ground level, or at the top of the stand taking a picture over the top, to make sure that we have enough assets to use during those quiet periods. So I can't recommend enough getting those bank of assets sort of ready to go throughout the year. Another thing to think about when you're considering what to post is what you're trying to do, and that pertains to that third bullet point there. So if you are just trying to engage because you haven't posted for a while, then it might be slightly more informal in nature. You might be trying to make people have a laugh, at maybe a flashback to things that might have happened in the summer, or you might be trying to be slightly more informative. And with those, sorry, just to backtrack slightly, with that laughter, you might want to go with sort of emojis and things that might be engage a little bit more engagement in that sense, but you might want to go with something more formal, fewer emojis if you're talking about fundraising or something that's slightly more serious as well. And that last bullet point is really important, never to forget that you are the sort of rights holder to the information that you share. Whilst you may not think what you have to say is particularly interesting, you guys are sort of the converted, if you like, and you're talking to people who know a lot less about the club, so you can't really overpost as long as you are answering that first bullet point. So if there is someone out there who is going to be informed or engaged by what you post, then please do share it. You are the rights holder, as I say, to what you have to say, and no posting is sort of too much. On to reach. We'll scoot through this fairly quickly, but reach, as it sort of suggests, and it's something that Ian mentioned, is about trying to maximize the number of people who you are, as it suggests, reaching. And this can be done in a number of ways. That man on the left there, you may recognize him, you may not, depending on your sort of evening habits, is a man called Chris Hughes, who was on a reality TV show called Love Island, and he has about 2 million followers on Instagram. So what we do as a brand, as Trent Bridge, is politely ask and engage with him to share pictures and videos when he's at the ground, because we, as a Instagram account who has about 90,000 followers, can really stretch who the people that we're reaching if we engage with someone like him and he's able to share that as well. So if that's related back to your own club, then it might be talking to parents who have businesses with a big reach, or it might be players within the club at the senior end who have a big following, maybe outside of cricket, who, if you're putting out a post about trying to get more players in the club, if you're just putting that on your own social accounts where you are preaching to the converted, you're going to get a limited amount of people in. So if you can try and extend your reach by using things like influencers, then you're going to sort of get that message a lot further and a lot wider. So really think about who, and go back to Joe's point about the surveys really, but who in your club can sort of get that message going a little bit further as well. On the tagging front, making sure that when you are putting photos and posts up, that you're tagging them as it sounds on the social media itself. So if it's a picture, then putting their account in, because they might want to share. It's always nice to be mentioned on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever it might be. But also just giving them a nudge, perhaps when you've put something up on Twitter. Maybe it's a match report, and you might want to say to them, "Look, I've put this match report up on Twitter or Facebook. You're mentioning it. It might be worth you sharing it as well and getting that reach as far as it can go." And on that final point, spend. It's probably something that we think a lot about as a department, as a marketing department, and particularly it can be something maybe that's considered a bit formal, really, and a bit business-like, spending on advertising and extending the reach of your posts. But a little can go a long way, particularly on Facebook, where the advertising is almost very intuitive. I think I manage my club back home, and when you post, it almost offers you the opportunity to spend £5-10 on your post and get that message going further and wider. And it really does get a lot of return on your investment. So you might think, especially if you're maybe fundraising or recruiting new players, those sort of messages where you want to engage people outside of your current club, you might want to consider spending £5 or £10, going through that very intuitive process and just testing the water to see how much return you get on that, because it's definitely worth thinking about if you can afford to do so. I think I'm now going to pass over back to Crofty.
Yeah, that's a picture of me standing on a chair with a with a phone taking a picture. So I'm just going to just run you through a bit of who. So I think Joe mentioned at the beginning a skills audit amongst your members of your club and what people do for a living and who might be the right people to get involved in your social media. So aside from getting somebody who's stupid enough to stand on a chair to take a photo of a field, I've just listed a few sort of hotspots, really, that if you have got one of these within the club, a journo, a marketeer, failing that, customer service, somebody who works in customer service, because they tend to be decent with the written word and formulating sentences and things. I think those are the people to approach about getting involved in your social media. And once you've got that bank of people, or once you've got those people that are going to be involved, a bit of a WhatsApp sharing centre is it's a no-brainer, really. Even if it's people who aren't going to be involved in posting on the social media, if they get busy with their phones and then take photos from here and there and what have you, just get them all in a group, get a bit of banter going, but also just get the content, the imagery, and the little videos into the main hub, so you can all start posting them out again. Some clubs will be luckier than others. Some will have some hidden gems in there of people who work in really relevant industries. So yeah, do endeavour to find out and try and get the right people involved. And we are on back to Matt for some more hints and tips.
Cheers, Crofty. Yeah, just a few hints and tips that may sort of help you out. Posting at peak times is something that you'll probably learn a little bit with as you go on, really. It can be skewed a little bit by exactly what you post, and I think sometimes it's more important the actual content that you are posting than the time. As long as we're not talking 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning, the best things will fly. We'll find obviously our best performing posts when we win things or when we lose things quite dramatically. Either of those things get a lot of interaction, which might suggest sometimes that maybe a Sunday at 8:30 at night is a great time to post. It may or may not be, but the content is going to drive some of that as well. But aside from all that, you will start to notice the more you post that certain times work better for you, that your audience is more engaged at certain times, those likes and retweets and engagements that you'll see, the sort of the views of each post as well. So it's kind of a live and learn thing a little bit, really. You'll pick that up as you go. The more times you do it, the more times you'll realise that, yeah, this is a good time for us to post something. Find multiple ways to say the same thing is kind of, we all have something we want to push, and this may be the case in the winter or the summer. There might be an event you want to sort of promote and put people to. One tweet isn't necessarily going to catch everyone. We can't see every tweet that's on our timeline, so you're going to want to kind of push that repeatedly, maybe 3 or 4 times to make sure as many people as possible see the message. But it's worth doing that in different ways, partly because of the algorithm stuff we talked about earlier. Facebook might start to penalise you if you post exactly the same thing 2 or 3 days apart. It might think, well, this isn't worth promoting to people's news feeds because they've seen it already. And partly just to keep people engaged, really. You can promote events or happenings in in sort of multiple ways. It can be a video, it can be a graphic, it can be a different stills photo. You can word things differently, maybe link off to a piece or a useful link about something. It's worth trying to find those 3 or 4 ways to go about the same thing and to post about the same thing. It means that it's an easier way to keep your frequency up. If we do sort of interviews with players through the winter, we'd probably share that 4 or 5 times, maybe, if there's enough in it, on our social media, with little clips of 30 seconds of them saying something, a photo of them at an emotional moment that links back to the piece, or sharing something in full. Those sorts of hints and tips can work regardless of what the content is, really. So keeping that kind of that churn up will help with the consistency we talked about over the winter as well. If you're starting kind of a throwback Thursday kind of thing through the winter, then to keep that going week in, week out, to make sure the consistency is there, to keep your audience there, finding multiple ways of sharing similar things can probably help you with that. Linking off is something that can work both ways, really. Hyperlinks on tweets and Facebook posts. It's worth considering whether that's something your post necessarily needs all the time. There's a school of thought that sometimes Facebook can penalise you for linking away from their platform. They want to keep you nicely, safely housed within their ecosystem. So if you can say what you need to say within a post, within a photo, that's something that's worth considering. Obviously, Instagram, you can't link people off as easily anyway, so that applies there, and then same on a few other platforms as well. So it can be worth considering that. Sometimes you'll need to link people away if you get them to sign up for something, but if you don't need to, if it's not going to add anything extra to it, then maybe try and get it all done within the post. It's something to think about on a sort of post by post basis, really. We'll mix and match that a little bit depending on the content that we're doing, and I'm sure it'll be the same for you. Talked about non-chronological displays a little bit earlier on as well. Actually, it's that whole idea, particularly on Facebook, that things don't display chronologically. On Twitter, they tend to, but on Facebook, they generally don't, unless people click through to your profile, and more people are probably going to see what you're doing on their news feed than on your profile. So it's worth bearing that in mind, that everything's got to, particularly on platforms like Facebook and Instagram, it's got to stand on its own as a piece. It's not got to be something where you need to have seen the 2 or 3 posts before it for it to make sense. And it could pop up 3 or 4 days after you post it as well. So it's worth bearing that in mind. If you post something tonight and people don't see it until Friday because it hasn't generated the momentum for whatever reason for people to have shared it enough to have seen it, does it still make sense on Friday? Is that still going to work for the audience? So it's something to keep in mind again. And post and interact, it's social media rather than purely kind of a broadcast platform. So it's well worth engaging with your audience as well. Obviously, it brings in a little bit more jeopardy sometimes. You sort of conversing back and forth, and you've sort of got to be sure that the tone of what you're saying is what you want to say as well. But it's a two-way street. If you interact with your followers in the comments or reply to what they're saying, then that sort of breeds a little bit of a community as well. That's hopefully going to grow a little bit and to help you out with your reach and your engagement as you go forward. So that's a few hints and tips. Ollie's got a few more.
Yes, I do indeed have 4 more. I'm actually going to start with the third one, which is timeless content, because that's a bit more sort of general advice. Then I'll move on to the other 3, which are a little bit more practical. Timeless content refers to the fact that because of the algorithms and the way that the different platform works, as Matt mentioned there, you might find best in winter to talk in general terms. So you might be posting throwback pictures, you might be posting pictures of grounds. If you can avoid sort of dating the content itself, say yesterday this happened, because you might take a little bit longer before you post again, that will get you a big thumbs up, and the reach of that post itself is going to go a lot further. So if you can make that content as timeless as possible, then it's going to go a lot further. So that's a general piece of advice. In a more sort of practical sense, the top point there, closed groups for internal communications, refers to, I suppose, WhatsApp group, which Crofty has mentioned already, and closed Facebook groups already. You can sort of protect your brand as a club. If you've got reams of information to give to your members, you might find it a lot easier to post an internal forum, so that you're not having to broadcast information in an external way that might not be of interest, to those external stakeholders. So I suppose it goes a little bit back to my initial points earlier, which is, who are you trying to engage? If it is just your members, then consider going on the internal channels, because that might be in a more appropriate way of sort of tapping them up. Software for simple asset creation. Again, as I said, multimedia is the way that social media is going now. You want to get sort of images and videos along with your along with what you have to say. And a really good way of doing that is the templates that are available on almost every app now. So while some people are very talented with Photoshop and photo editing, others like myself are certainly not, but you can shortcut that by getting any of these apps. I think the one that I use from the App Store is called Photoshop Express. It's free unless you pay for the other stuff that you don't need, and you can literally just put a picture behind and it gives you loads and loads of templates to make your stuff look quite professional in quite an easy way. So yeah, would definitely advise just downloading a simple asset creation tool from your App Store. Photoshop Express is the one I use. And scheduling as well. Obviously, a lot of you guys are going to be very busy. You work jobs and have lives away from the cricket clubs. So scheduling is a sort of tool, I suppose, where you can sit down and post things ahead of time, which can be really useful. If you've got half an hour, 45 minutes to spare as a communications officer in your role, then you can get, I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6 posts generated to go out on Twitter and Facebook ahead of time without you needing to sit there throughout the week. The way you do that for Facebook is by going to Facebook Creator Studio. So if you just go type that into Google, literally Facebook Creator Studio, then you log into Facebook as you would ordinarily, click post, and then it gives you the option before you post at the bottom just to schedule it rather than posting it there and then. And on Twitter, you have the capability to do so as well. So rather than clicking tweet, or the big blue button is, there's a little calendar next to it, and you can decide to post at a different time as well. So a really good way to use your time effectively if you've got a little bit of it, rather than having to sort of set your alarm for whatever it might be, 7 p.m. on a Monday to remind people about an AGM or whatever it might be. You can do that ahead of time, and that can be very useful. That's all from me.
I think it's over to me to summarise what we've hopefully learned today. I think the first 2 bullet points can almost come to like consistency is one of the best things that we can have, but almost it's got to be relevant and also quality. It's quality over quantity for us. Where we'll always go down that line. We want to get as much out as possible, but we won't be shrimping on the quality of it. The emotion or exclusivity almost comes from whatever's happening at your club. If you won a tight game against a rival, if you won a trophy that year, if you won a tight game that you can talk back to and give a unique experience from your own point of view on that. And then obviously if you've got former cricketers, current cricketers are in the Nottinghamshire setup anywhere else, or links to that can where maybe you can find your kind of influence and tagging that can kind of extend your reach a little bit. And then if you've got the budget and more so maybe getting those good news stories about winning trophies, the amount of teams you've got, the amount of juniors you've got playing, whatever the key things that your club does, you can hopefully spend and get that in front of more eyeballs, and hopefully that'll bring some more people down to your club. And finally, find the most articulate admin you can. As I say, it doesn't have to have a marketeer or social media background, whoever may be whoever you think might write the best social posts and articulate the best, because they are going to be the face of your club outwardly on social media. So thanks everyone for listening to us today, and if you've got any questions, one of the 4 of us will hopefully be able to help you.
Any questions been typed in, Joe?
No, I've had no questions in the chat. So I don't know if anybody who's still with us, they want to just unmute themselves and shout up if they have any questions. Or you can, I appreciate we've kept you for just over an hour. Hopefully, was a lot of useful information. But if you have any questions, feel free to pick that up with the club development officers offline, and hopefully we can advise. But if you want to make use of these guys' expertise while they're here, please shout up now.
I suppose just while people decide whether or not they want to do that, the only thing I would add is just please don't be bashful and introverted about your social media. Your local cricket clubs form massive parts of the communities that they're in. And also they're the gateway to people playing what I think a lot of people on this call think is the best sport that there is. So you've got a lot of positive stuff to shout about. Don't be introverted, bashful. Don't assume that no one gives a shit. That's the bullet point there, because people absolutely will. So yeah, please be bold and go for it on your social media.
Has anybody got any questions before I bring this to an end? Don't think so.
The only thing I want to say, Joe, thank you guys. It's been super. I think the special one really is the point at the bottom, not necessarily articulate, but finding the right person who, your point made about committee members often being at the other end of things. I don't think it's far wrong.
Yeah,
So,
I think, yeah, Steph, obviously you'll know, being a committee member, that often the jobs will fall to the same people, whereas this is one where really you want to have somebody dedicated to doing this role on their own, so they've got the time and hopefully the expertise, as the guys have pointed out, to do the job right.
And this one's genuinely fun, isn't it? There's a lot of jobs that the volunteers are doing because they love their club for the good of the club that aren't necessarily that enjoyable to do. I would say this is fun, so you would hope that it would be something that somebody perhaps outside of a normal group of volunteers that are doing everything might be interested in doing.
Yeah, excellent, Tom. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Steph. Alex,
I've got
have
a
you
question.
got a question?
Yeah. Mainly to Tom, really. What's your recommendation of how many people should have the platform's admin rights?
So I would do it based on how many people have you got with the expertise to do it properly. If that's one person and then they get all the content flooded into them that they can sort of decipher off, edit, decide what's worth it, and they post, then that's fine. As we talked about quality over quantity.
Yeah.
We don't want to give it to too many people, so they're putting stuff out that knackers your brand and the things just don't look right. But equally, if there's 6, if you're lucky enough that you've got 6 people within your club that can all do it to a good enough standard, as long as they're talking to each other via WhatsApp or what have you, or they've got processes in place whereby everything's being scheduled and they can see that something else is already on the schedule, I would have no specific limit on it in that regard.
Okay, it's just that I'm doing a lot with Yorkshire Disability Cricket.
Yeah.
And we've decided to let's update the Twitter account, add it onto Instagram. We've also got a Facebook account. I'm just waiting for the access for that. And I've set up a TikTok. And at the moment, we're getting more views on Insta and TikTok than we are on the other two.
Yeah, and to be honest, I wouldn't be shy to just focus on the ones that are working. If the others really aren't working for you, make the ones that are working as good as they can possibly be. Invest time in that. If Twitter's not really working for you, then I would advise to just get rid of it. If Facebook's not working for you, it's not a bad idea to keep it there in case you want to do paid stuff, because Facebook is really good for when you're going to put a little bit of money behind it to then target it to an audience that you want. So it might be that you just post very infrequently, but just sort of point people to your Instagram page. But then at least Facebook still exists for you. In order to do your paid for stuff.
I think also the big one for me is content. You need to get the content. Without the content, you can't put anything up.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's what there's no shortcut to that, unfortunately. It's really just people being prepared to get the camera phone out and take the picture, and or just put something in writing, or play with the software that Ollie talked about to do some graphics. I think what we said about building a bank of generic content is good and is important, and that can be your sort of grass level photos that we talked about, but also get your club's jumper, get your club's cap, put it in different locations on the ground, and just take loads and loads of photos of it, because out of 100 that you take, there might be 5 that are really nice, and then that's 5 days worth of content further down the line. As
I said, our TikTok and Instagram are absolutely brand new, as in this week, and we're getting hits on. We're getting hits on Twitter, but we don't really have the content to go out, because the stuff I'm posting on Twitter, on TikTok, has already been shared loads of times on Twitter. So what's the point of getting it back on there?
Yeah, Twitter's a tough one, because the shelf life of your average tweet is 7 minutes. And if you don't get them within the first 7 minutes, you're probably not going to get them. Whereas with Insta, Facebook, if your post gathers some momentum later on because more people suddenly start liking it, commenting upon it, it can gather momentum at a much later point. So yeah, I mean, Instagram, the way I talk about it in terms of audiences, Twitter is gradually shrinking. Facebook is pretty stable and I think is pretty much definitely here to stay. And Instagram's the one that's growing. So that's interesting insight to have when you're making decisions about which way to go. But yeah, don't be shy to bin the ones that aren't working and focus on the ones that are. That's definitely.
Also, we've got a website that links into Twitter and Facebook, so I don't actually have to have the access to it if the website's doing it for me. So I've also got one tool I can use to take it into both platforms, where I can take my time on the two platforms that work in.
Yeah, so you put it into your website and then it auto-generates a post for Facebook and Twitter. Is that? Yeah. It's handy to have, but also keep an eye on it, because if you think of a way of posting it that might be better or more impactful by doing it yourself, then that's probably even better than the automated thing, isn't it?
Yeah. No, thank you.
Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Alex. Any more questions?
I don't know that one.
Well, Alexa, I don't know if anyone heard that line me, but Alexa thought I was asking her something then. So I think that brings it a natural end to proceedings. I just want to say a massive thank you to Tom and Matt and Dan and Ollie for joining us, and for Ian and for everybody giving up their time on a Monday evening. I think that clubs will find that really useful over the course of several years. We can, keep sending this out to clubs and keep putting clips on our own social media channels to spread these hints and tips for years to come. So I really want to thank you for your time and your effort, guys. It was brilliant. So thank you very much. And unless anything else, I shall stop recording and close down the Zoom. Thanks, everyone.